Let her see the consequences of her choices. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my self-respect and setting boundaries for what I would and wouldn't tolerate in my life. Over the next few days, I distanced myself emotionally. Samantha seemed oblivious, or perhaps indifferent to my internal turmoil. Her excitement for her weekend trip with Larry was palpable. She spoke about it with the casualness of someone planning a grocery run. The audacity was both infuriating and heartbreaking. On the day she was set to leave, she packed her bags with a carefree demeanor, humming a tune that once held sweet memories for us. I didn't stop her. I didn't say a word. My silence wasn't out of acceptance, but out of sheer disbelief at the audacity of the situation. As soon as she left, I executed my plan. I contacted a lawyer to discuss the legalities of separation. My goal was to protect myself financially and emotionally. I gathered all the necessary documents, bank statements, and records of our shared assets. It wasn't an act of hostility, but a necessary step to ensure my future. I also spoke with a therapist. I realized that processing the betrayal and my emotions was critical. The therapist validated my feelings and helped me see that I wasn't to blame for Samantha's actions. This wasn't about me failing as a husband. It was about her choices and inability to communicate her dissatisfaction constructively. The weekend passed slowly, each hour a reminder of the crumbling foundation of our marriage. When Samantha returned, she carried a new energy, one that was both exhilarating and foreign. She didn't even attempt to hide the glow of her weekend with Larry. "How was your weekend?" I asked, my tone measured but loaded with unspoken questions. "It was wonderful," she said, her eyes avoiding mine. "It gave me clarity about what I want." "And what is that?" I pressed, knowing full well her answer could dismantle whatever remained of our union. "I need freedom, Andrew. I feel alive when I'm not tied down by the expectations of our marriage." Her words stung, but they also brought a strange sense of relief. "At least now," I had clarity too. "I understand," I said, my voice steady. "I'll give you the freedom you're asking for." She looked surprised, perhaps expecting a fight or a plea for her to stay. But I had no energy left for battles or negotiations. I had already made my decision. Over the following weeks, I moved out of our shared home and into an apartment closer to work. Samantha didn't resist. In fact, she seemed almost relieved. The process of separating was painful, but it was also empowering. Each step away from her was a step closer to regaining my sense of self. Months later, as the divorce papers were finalized, I reflected on the journey. Losing Samantha felt like losing a part of myself, but it also allowed me to rediscover who I was beyond the confines of our marriage. Through therapy and support from friends, I healed. I started focusing on my hobbies, building new friendships, and setting goals for my future. Samantha's betrayal was a turning point, not an end. It taught me the value of self-respect and the importance of addressing problems head-on, no matter how uncomfortable. In the end, Samantha got the freedom she craved, and I got the peace I deserved. Life moved on, and so did I. Stronger and more resilient than ever before, I decided she would feel the sting of rejection just as deeply as I had. On Friday, I began my preparations in earnest. By Saturday morning, I had hired a locksmith to change all the locks on our home. I carefully packed all her belongings into black trash bags and stacked them neatly in the garage. Meanwhile, she was upstairs, eagerly packing her suitcase, radiating excitement. That evening, I quietly recorded her words as she enthusiastically described her upcoming plans, preserving them as evidence for the divorce I now saw as inevitable. Before bed, she kissed me on the cheek and said, "I love you, Andrew. You'll see. This will make everything better." She had no clue what awaited her. On Saturday morning, she left without hesitation. I watched from the window as Larry's car pulled into the driveway. Dressed in her favorite red dress, she stepped outside, blew me a kiss, and got into his car. I stood there motionless, watching until they disappeared down the street. By noon, The locksmith had finished, and with a simple turn of the key, Samantha's access to our home and my life was revoked. I removed her name from the mailbox and prepared myself for what was to come. That evening, I stayed home alone. The house, once filled with warmth and memories, now felt like an empty shell, a reflection of the solitude I had embraced. When Samantha returned on Sunday night, she was a disheveled mess. Her hair was tangled, her eyes red from crying, and her once pristine red dress was wrinkled and stained. She approached the door, attempting to unlock it, only to realize her key no longer worked. Panic overtook her, and she began banging on the door. Shouting my name, I watched her through the security camera, her desperation etched across her face. Finally, I opened the door. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she demanded, "What is this, Andrew? Why are you doing this?" She tried to push past me, but I blocked her path. My voice was cold and steady as I said, "You wanted excitement, Samantha. Now you have it." Her face crumbled as the weight of the moment sank in. "Andrew, please," she began, her voice breaking as tears streamed down her face. I held up my phone, playing the recording of her gleefully describing her plans for the weekend with Larry. The color drained from her face as the realization of her actions hit her. "You've destroyed us, Samantha. Now you'll have to live with that," I said with finality. Her response was a flood of panicked apologies, desperate excuses, and blame shifting. She insisted it wasn't as bad as it seemed, blaming Larry and claiming she hadn't meant for things to go this far. But her justifications didn't matter anymore. She had made her choice and turned her back on our marriage. I pointed to the packed suitcases in the garage. "Take your things and go. You wanted excitement. Go find it alone." Her sobs filled the night air as I slammed the door shut. She lingered outside for a while, perhaps hoping I would change my mind. But I didn't. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no version of this story where she returned to my life the following week. I filed for divorce. I ensured the papers would be delivered to her parents' home, as she no longer had a stable address. Word eventually reached me that she was staying with Julia, an old friend who was likely unaware of the full scope of Samantha's betrayal. Even after leaving, Samantha didn't go quietly. She bombarded me with texts, calls, and desperate voicemails. Her mother even called me in tears, pleading for me to reconsider. But the betrayal had cut too deep. Each message, each attempt at contact, was like pouring salt on an open wound, dragging me back to the memory of her carefree laughter as she packed for that ill-fated weekend with Larry. Her audacity and disregard for my feelings were a torment I could no longer endure. I ignored every message, every plea, and every apology. For the first time in months, I put myself first. The path forward wasn't easy, but it was mine to walk. Samantha's choices had shattered our life together, but they had also given me clarity, a chance to rebuild, stronger and wiser than before. I couldn't forgive or forget. Predictably, Samantha escalated. One Wednesday afternoon, while I was sifting through reports at work, I overheard her frantic voice at the receptionist's desk. She was pleading, desperate. I stepped out to find her disheveled, clutching the divorce papers, her face puffy and red from crying. "What do you want, Samantha?" I asked sharply, my voice cutting through the tension as I guided her to a private room. My colleagues avoided the scene, pretending not to notice. She thrust the unsigned divorce papers at me. "I can't do this, Andrew. I love you. Please, we can fix this." I looked at her, a hollow shadow of the vibrant woman I once loved. The spark of arrogance and thrill-seeking that had once defined her was now replaced by raw desperation. "There's nothing left to fix," I replied coldly. "You made your choices. Now you have to live with them." She broke into uncontrollable sobs, muttering about her mistakes and admitting she'd sought excitement, but found only regret. "You're the only one I've ever loved," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her words tightened something in my chest, a mix of anger and sadness. "You thought you could flirt with disaster and come back unscathed," I said. But you can't erase what you did. She reached for me, but I stepped away. I've already given you my answer, I said firmly, leaving her behind in that room. The quiet that followed her departure was heavy, yet oddly freeing. For a while, she stopped reaching out. Mutual acquaintances told me she'd started therapy, a step in the right direction for her, but far too late to mend what she had shattered. I wasn't ready to let her off so easily. I compiled everything: text messages, dinner reservations, and a detailed timeline of her betrayal. I sent it all to her parents' house, attached with a brief note. This is why I can never come back. This is why it's over. The next day, I received a voicemail from her. Her voice trembled, each word interspersed with shaky breaths. "I got your package," she said quietly. "I understand now, Andrew. I see the damage I caused, how deeply I hurt you. I can't undo it, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed you to know. I finally understand." Her admission, stripped of excuses and defenses, brought an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time, she acknowledged the magnitude of her actions. A few weeks later, the divorce was finalized without further theatrics. She signed the papers and returned to her parents' home. I stayed behind, reclaiming the house we had once shared. Methodically, I removed every trace of her from the space, transforming it into something entirely my own. The silence that had once felt suffocating now brought peace. In that stillness, I began to rebuild my life. For the first time in years, I turned my focus inward, rediscovering who I was without the weight of our fractured relationship. The solitude wasn't loneliness. It was liberation. At last, I could breathe, knowing the storm had finally passed. I embraced a disciplined fitness regimen, rekindled my love for hiking, and revisited painting, a passion I had long neglected. Throughout this transformative period, my best friend Alexander remained my anchor. He encouraged me to push forward, especially during moments when exhaustion or doubt threatened to overwhelm me. Slowly but surely, I began rediscovering pieces of the person I used to be. It was during this time that Samantha attempted to reconnect. She sent me a deeply emotional letter, once again expressing regret and detailing the steps she was taking to rebuild her life. I chose not to respond. Her acknowledgement of the pain she caused was enough for me. She was on a separate journey, one that no longer intersected with mine. As the days turned into months, the seasons shifted, and so did I. The man I had become bore little resemblance to the shattered figure who had once sat powerless, watching his wife prepare herself for another man. I had transformed, growing stronger and wiser. I came to understand an essential truth. No matter how engulfing the darkness, the light is always within reach, if you summon the strength to seek it. Then, during one of my hikes with Alexander, we encountered a group of strangers on the trail. Among them was Emily, a kind, approachable woman whose warm smile seemed to lift a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Emily joined us on our hike that day, and as we walked, I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, for the first time in years. Our casual conversations grew more frequent, eventually leading to an invitation for coffee. What blossomed between us wasn't a whirlwind romance, but something grounded and sincere. Through my time with Emily, I discovered a profound lesson. Love doesn't require grand gestures or theatrical displays. True love thrives on consistency, genuine presence, and mutual respect. And so, this chapter of my life reaches a resting point. Samantha chose her path and faced its consequences. Meanwhile, I refused to let betrayal define me. I reclaimed my life and found a way to move forward. Will Emily become my forever? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain. I have learned that no matter how devastating the fall, there is always a way to rise again.